Will the new Spyro be a remake, a reboot, a sequel, or a continuation? There are many directions that Toys for Bob can go, but I think I have an idea in terms of what Toys for Bob will actually do with this game. And it's all thanks to the knowledge of Paul Yan, the studio head at Toys for Bob. Let's talk about it.
Whoa!
What's up guys, Canadian Guy A here. Many have wondered what the new Spyro title would exactly be. Would it be a reboot, a remake, maybe a sequel? Would it acknowledge and continue off the events of Spyro Enter the Dragonfly or A Hero's Tale? Could it mention the Legend of Spyro series, or heck, maybe even Skylanders? Well, to find some kind of conclusion and the closest thing to a concrete answer, we have to go to Paul Yan's Game Development Conference talk about Crash Bandicoot 4, It's About Time. During this talk, Paul explained Toys for Bob's thoughts and design process to figure out what kind of Crash game to make. So I thought, well, why don't I put Spyro through the exact same process? Maybe I can find a similar result. Following Toys for Bob's lead may help me determine what to expect when it comes to a brand new Spyro title. Now, in Paul's Game Development Talk Conference, or the GDC, he says that while figuring out what direction to go, Toys for Bob as a team looked at the ideas of both making a sequel versus rebooting the Crash Bandicoot franchise. A sequel's job would be to take what was already there and evolve it into something better than it was before, while a reboot was going to be starting from almost scratch and taking the franchise a completely new direction. What they determined was that if they were to go the direction of a reboot, it would attract new fans, but also might possibly alienate and offend the original players. On the flip side, if they decide to go for more of a sequel, it would entertain the original players, but may not draw in as many new ones. So, Toys for Bob had to figure out whether or not there was a strong enough fan base to validate a sequel, or if the player base was just too small and they needed to wipe the slate clean for a new generation of players. So, Toys for Bob started to look at the demographics of their audience. Luckily enough for them, the Crash Insane trilogy had released right when they started to work on Crash Bandicoot 4, It's About Time. What they found was that people in their mid-20s to early 40s were the most interested demographic. Basically, people who were around the ages of 5 to 15 when Crash Bandicoot was released. This Crash Insane data was invaluable to Toys for Bob, as it allowed them to hone in on what audience to focus their game on. But how can I get my hands on this data for Spyro? So I thought, well, it may not be exactly the same, but since my YouTube channel is one of the biggest channels covering news and rumors for Spyro 4, and we just crossed 78,000 subscribers, which, by the way, thank you everyone for your support on that, I figured we could just use the demographics from my most recent Spyro 4 videos. And the numbers are pretty unanimous, with the largest category by a whopping 70% being between the ages of 25 to 34, with 18 to 24 being in second at around 20%. Again, that's across 3 videos with over 90,000 views and counting in total. The data that I have found seems to be quite similar to what Paul and his team at Toys for Bob discovered as well. The demographics that are interested in a new Spyro title, according to my data, is between the ages of about 20 to 35. But we're not quite done with the analysis yet. Paul Yan went on to explain and show a chart depicting Crash Bandicoot's history of scores and commercial sales for each title, highlighting that the majority of commercial and critic success was clearly during the first 3 games. They determined that, especially with their target demographic, most fond memories and positive signals skewed extremely towards the first 3 games, which means the interested demographic and commercial and critic success lined up perfectly. So, I made the same kind of chart for Spyro. Now, I want to make a quick note here. I did not include the portable titles, and I did not include the sales for A New Beginning because there was a significant chunk of missing data on that end. But overall, just like Crash, the first 3 games are clearly above the rest, with a large notable decline for Enter the Dragonfly. Big surprise. Also, for fun, I also included the Reignited trilogy. which were the remakes of the original 3 games, to drive home the fact that a large majority of interest in Spyro the Dragon is in the original trilogy. Once again, like what Toys for Bob discovered for Crash Bandicoot, the demographic for Spyro also lines up with both commercial and critic success along with the demographic. So, Toys for Bob's outcome for Crash Bandicoot was to make a sequel based off of the original 3 games, and since we are almost at an identical conclusion for Spyro, I would say that the brand new Spyro title should also be a sequel based off of the original 3 games. Now, I could just stop here, say thanks for watching, and sign off, or I could dig a little bit deeper. Maybe I can sniff out the direction Toys for Bob wants to take the game. Since I'm assuming that the design philosophy is going to be similar to how they approached Crash Bandicoot 4, especially since the end game seems to be the same, I decided to sit and go through this GDC talk once more to really get an idea of how Toys for Bob would approach development for a new Spyro, using the data for their development of Crash Bandicoot 4. But I came across something that did actually shock me. At one point, Paul was describing that they created design pillars for this new Crash title by the names of tone, gameplay, and world. These pillars would basically be a guide for Toys for Bob to make sure they stay on course with their ideas as they dove into active development. But for some reason, I felt like I had heard of these terms before, and it turned out I was actually right. In October 2023, 2 years after this game developer conference talk was actually done, I had an interview with Paul Yan. Now, during that interview, I had asked him what were the 3 secret ingredients that made Spyro such a success, since Spyro Reignited was the only post-Insomniac Spyro game that came even remotely close to achieving the same success as Insomniac. Now, this clip is edited for time, but the context remains the same.
I think that the tone is a big part of it. It's relaxing. It's an escape from the harshness of reality. It's a world that invites exploration and discovery. It's soothing. It's low pressure. It's enchanting. That seems like probably one of the main ingredients to me. The second, I think, is movement. So Spyro's movement is so fluid and flow-like. I think that that's really timeless, and there's a sense of mastery even in that flow-like control scheme. I think that there's a lot of opportunity to expand there, and I think that's interesting. And then I think third is that like Spyro is one of the first 3D games, first in a sense open world, non-linear type of game. And I think that the freedom to choose your path, the freedom to engage with conflict or not, I think that that's a big part of it as well.
Wait, did he just say tone, gameplay, and world? Didn't we just see these exact words from when we were looking at the 3 pillars that they established for Crash Bandicoot? And isn't Paul still the creative director at Toys for Bob? And was he not the one who conducted the GDC conference to explain how they approach the development using these exact same words? Ladies and gentlemen, I may have found some interesting design pillars. Now, if you've seen my previous video, which I'll link at the end of this one, based on the timeline I showed, if my prediction is accurate, at the time of this interview, Toys for Bob would have likely had these design pillars established. Now, based off of what Paul said, a hypothetical Spyro 4 could follow these design pillars. For tone, the keywords would be relaxing escape, whimsical, and enchanting. For gameplay, fluid and flow-like with a sense of mastery. And for the world, freedom of choice and an open world that encourages exploration. Seeing these design pillars gets me excited for a new title, because to me, Toys for Bob understands what made the original game so much fun. The worlds are imaginative and enchanting, the controls are smooth and roll into each other flawlessly, and the worlds encourage exploration. However, the one thing that made me raise an eyebrow was his comments on how open the worlds actually were. Paul seemed to emphasize the freedom of choice within the worlds, like whether or not you had to engage with enemies. But I would argue that while there are branching and open areas in the original trilogy, most levels have a relatively guided path.
I think that that's really timeless, and there's a sense of mastery even in that flow-like control scheme. I think that there's a lot of opportunity to expand there, and I think that's interesting. I think there's a lot of lessons that you could apply from modern day open world games that would be really interesting for Spyro.
To me, this is an implication that there might be some significantly larger open aspects in terms of a new game. This in turn would also give players more options for exploring, which in turn again would likely give Spyro new ways to traverse this new world. In my opinion, Spyro 4, or the new Spyro title, whatever you want to call it, will be a sequel that is going to be based off of the original trilogy and targeted to 20 to 35-year-olds, but still playable for younger players. Its core gameplay mechanics will feature a tone that's whimsical and enchanting, but also a relaxing escape. The controls will focus on a feeling that are more fluid and flow-like, but still have a high degree of mastery, and the world will be much more open, giving you freedom to choose your path and encourage exploration. Now, before you go, I have some good news and some bad news about Spyro 4. If you want to know what I mean, you can check this video out here. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. Bye-bye!